There was no fine print around the use of HRH for commercial or non-commercial purposes. It was very simple. They will no longer use their HRHs. Mm-hmm. It was very clear.
Pretty clear, yeah.
So it's been a bit of a surprise to a lot of people. And this emerged when Meghan did a podcast this week, not her own podcast, but a podcast with her friend Jamie Kern-Lima, who owns a cosmetics company. And there was a YouTube video of it and a shot of a basket from a while ago that Meghan had dropped round to her friend, including some raspberry, not jam or spread, but it was like sauce. Or strawberry sauce that she'd made for her.
She had some spread in the fridge though, didn't she? Her friend said. She said it's been there for all year, so I don't know why she hadn't eaten it.
With a note card that said, with the compliments of HRH, the Duchess of Sussex.
Sure.
Now, it's kicked up a bit of a stink, hasn't it?
So Roya, a sombre moment to begin this week, but a significant one nonetheless.
It was a very poignant moment, actually. Yesterday, and you were there with the King and Queen, they were hosting a reception at Buckingham Palace to mark the work being done by cancer charities across the UK.
And of course, this isn't just a symbolic gesture from the King. This is personal, isn't it?
It was very personal. And we had that message from the King yesterday, which he had written in the programme for the people who were attending this reception. And it was, I think, the most personal message we've had from the King about what it was like to receive a cancer diagnosis.
That was certainly how it was trailed by the palace. Yeah. You know, to great kind of fanfare. It's his most personal message yet. It's his most personal, most lyrical reflection yet on what it's like to have cancer. He talked about it being a daunting and at times frightening experience for not just those who are diagnosed, of course, but the families who love them as well.
He tried to keep it. It's an interesting balance for him, isn't it, the King? Because there is, of course, so much interest from us, from the wider public, about the fact that he's still receiving cancer treatment, how he's finding it, how he's, battling with it. But also he's very intent on not making it about him, isn't he? Mm-hmm. And making the focus wider in terms of the great people in communities and nurses and cancer charities that support cancer patients like him. And he tried to bring hope into that message too, didn't he?
Well, that's right. I think that's the thing, isn't it? That he wants it to be uplifting. He talked about, he made reference to the late Dame Deborah James, who was known as Bowel Babe, because she's the woman who a couple of years ago died aged 40 of bowel cancer, but before that raised millions of pounds for charity and perhaps more importantly, raised awareness of the issues and the symptoms surrounding cancer. And he quoted her actually in this message saying, he echoed her words, which were, "Find a life worth enjoying, take risks, love deeply, have no regrets, and always, always have rebellious hope."
I love that quote.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And for the King to echo that, I think is really, it was really poignant. It was a really emotional, had emotional impact, I think, because that's certainly how I think he feels about it. Over a year on, he's still having cancer treatment. Yeah. And actually, we started talking about this, saying it was a somber moment. But actually, last night's reception was really jolly.
Uplifting.
Deborah James's parents were there. They said it was an honour for the King to have used the words in his message.
I loved that her father was wearing his rebellious hope socks.
And he pulled,
which he kept flashing.
Yeah, Alistair James, the late Dame Deborah's father, had these socks on, and he had rebellious hope embroidered in them. He was flashing them. They're such a lovely couple as well. And the King, I think it meant such a lot for the King to meet them, to both the King and to them. And he said, "Look, I'm so sorry I didn't get the chance to meet your daughter. But she seems like a force of nature." And they said, yeah, she was.
What was interesting was seeing him and the Queen with so many different cancer charities there, many of which they're patrons of and have been for a very long time. And he talked about the fact that, he talked about how frightening a cancer diagnosis can be. He talked about me being one of the statistics, which I thought was interesting.
A leveller, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was the point he was making.
But he mentioned that the darkest moments of illness, and he's been through a few, I would imagine, can be illuminated by the greatest compassion. And I think that's what he and the Queen were trying to highlight yesterday, was the amazing compassion from all those people who work for cancer charities, who support cancer patients and communities, that out of something as horrendous as a cancer diagnosis as it can be, And of course, it's not just him. The Princess of Wales had her own one last year. She's now
he
in
talks
remission.
about the gratitude of my entire family, sort of bringing Catherine into that under that umbrella.
Yeah, he's trying to sort of find the positives and the hope that he talked about at the end. And one of the things that was mentioned to us and is constantly mentioned to us, but we see it, is the fact that he is living with cancer and he's living actively with cancer
very
at the
actively
moment. Because we've just been in Italy with them on the state visit. Last year we went to Australia and Samoa when he was receiving his treatment. So he's made a decision, and we've talked about this, to just crack on.
Plow on. Absolutely.
Have his treatment and be as active as he can.
And enjoy it as well. And last night there was a sense of enjoyment as well. There was this choir called Change and Check,
yes,
which was set up by Lorraine Kelly of ITV TV presenter fame.
They were all wearing
and Helen
pink.
Addis, a TV presenter. They were all wearing pink, and the Queen said, I wish I'd worn pink as well. And they performed there in the ballroom at Buckingham Palace, and then the King spent a long time, and the Queen, chatting to guests and things like that. At one point he met somebody from a charity, and they make wigs for young girls, particularly real hair wigs for those who've gone through chemotherapy or other cancer treatments and lost their hair as a result, so that they can feel better about themselves or feel they can still have some hair. And they said, well, if you grow your hair, Charles, for 10 inches, then you can donate to us. And he said, well, I'm even having trouble to grow my eyebrows at the moment. So we hear those little snippets about how he's coming along and the impact that treatment is having on him. Yeah. And of course, he was in hospital briefly before he went to Italy. So it's interesting to see there's a huge energy, there's huge optimism from the palace and from him particularly, but he is having a toll. We've both seen him looking tired.
Yeah, we have. Notable guests there. They were Charles and Camilla, supported by the Duchess of Gloucester. Amazing. But Fergie was there.
Yes, the Duchess of York.
Duchess of York had a very, very rare appearance at an official engagement. Now, of course...
And surprise appearance. She just sort of pinged up out of nowhere.
I think it's interesting. They are... I interviewed Fergie last year, and she talked about how close she still is to the King. Mm-hmm. And I've always found that, through all the sort of thick and thin of what goes on with the Duke of York, and we'll come on to that, it's very interesting to me that Charles and Camilla keep that link with her.
I think they're fond of her.
They're very fond of her. And she mentioned, I still love the fact that he calls me Fergie all these years later. I mean, she's known him since they were both children. But of course, she is someone who's been through and survived 2 cancer diagnoses.
So skin cancer and breast cancer.
She knows, like the King, she knows whereof she speaks when she's talking to those guests. But it was really interesting for me to see her there at an official engagement. Her former husband can't do those, but Fergie can. And that's fascinating.
Well, she can, yeah. I think, she hasn't really been disgraceful in the same way that he has in that respect. But she... and has a legitimate reason to be at a cancer reception, of course, because of her own experience and the way, not just that, she said to me last night that she has been supporting teenage cancer
she does a lot
charities
for Teenage Cancer Trust
for over 35 years. Yeah. Her father suffered from cancer. Her stepfather suffered from cancer. She's been through major surgery to have breast removed from breast cancer. And she's still got a sense of humour about the whole thing. She jokes that her boobs are called Eric and Derek.
Yes. That made it into print last year. Things I never thought I'd write.
And and then she had the melanoma as well off the back of that within a very short space of time. And she is... Yeah, and I'm not surprised the King and Queen are fond of her. She's so resilient and jolly with it.
She's resilient for sure.
And I think that it's a really interesting dynamic, isn't it? That she has been that bridge between Prince Andrew and his brother, the King.
There was one bit in the lineup that made me chuckle, which was when the King came in to meet the guests. Wes Streeting, of course, the Health Secretary, was first in the lineup. And he did say to the King, this is someone who puts himself out there, most mornings to do, various political programs, to be grilled by journalists. And he said to the King, this is my first lineup, so I'm a bit nervous.
He was as well.
Yeah, you could tell.
He was a bit nervous. I mean, again, somebody who's had his own personal cancer battle.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that, we see that quite a lot, don't we? Kind of the great and good and sometimes big stars of the silver screen, and then they turn to jelly when the monarch arrives.
Yeah. Anyway, it seemed like a reception that was full of hope.
This week, the Prince and Princess of Wales, who are known as the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay, or Lord and Lady of the Isles, when up in Scotland, stayed on the Isle of Mull and visited Mull and Iona, partly to support local tourism and champion the environment and the importance of local communities. but also to have a rather lovely time marking their 14th wedding anniversary on Tuesday.
In front of the world's media and a load of locals.
A bit like the King and Queen when they had their 20th anniversary in Rome.
Just like that.
They were out and about. So what did you make of this visit?
Well, I thought it was... I'm always interested when they go to Scotland because I think, the ties to Scotland, the links of the royal family to Scotland, the whole question around that's, rumbles slowly, quietly, simmers away about Scottish independence. So that... I know that the whole point of this trip was about focusing on championing the environment and the natural beauty of Mull and Iona and local skills, craftspeople, lifting up community centres, and the Royal Foundation has invested in various things on the islands. But all of that said, there's always another purpose, I think, to these kind of visits, which is to sort of, remind people of the royal family's very strong links and ties to Scotland.
Indeed.
Because, we know that that's an issue. I remember a few years ago going up to Scotland with William when he did his Lord High Commissioner's Week in Edinburgh, and that speech he gave with Nicola Sturgeon there, who was a staunch champion of independence, basically reminding people about the links. I've been in Scotland for some of my saddest times, death of his mother, my happiest times, and seeing the couple look so happy there.
And they met there, of course, at St Andrews University.
It's a reminder, I think, always of, and it's a subtle but pointed reminder of the royal family's links and ties to Scotland as part of the United Kingdom.
Indeed, and William's ties in particular as well, and their ties as a couple, because they mentioned the fact that they'd been to the Isle of Mull before in what they thought had been a secret getaway with friends when they were students up there at St Andrews. And the locals said, "Oh no, we knew you were here." And there was somebody bouncing on a trampoline trying to get a view of them and things like that.
What I loved about that, and what I thought was really special about that, was another local said, I took a load of photos and sent them to my friends. No, that never made the press. So
this is the thing in Scotland why they love to be there.
So the locals, on Mull were really respectful of that visit 20 or so years ago, and I think that spoke to also the fact that they are able to have a private life when they want to have a private life, and people are respectful of them as a couple.
And the late Queen had that as well, didn't she? She used to love going up to Balmoral, and she would go into the local shops and talk to tourists
Everyone.
who didn't know, sometimes didn't even know who she was.
Yeah.
And the King, he'll walk through Braemar actually and have a chat to people about, the local buildings or what's being done in that field over there. And we never hear about that. People don't blab in Scotland.
No, they don't.
They are able to go and have that kind of private time. So I think they find that quite precious.
Yeah.
They had a night in a self-catering cottage.
Happy anniversary, darling.
Without
you
the
can
children.
do the washing up. I'll do the cooking.
Talking about domestic skills, we learned that Kate was a dab hand at DIY.
With a chainsaw, which she was given for Christmas. Happy Christmas, darling. Here's a chainsaw.
She said that she'd received a chainsaw for Christmas, and this all came about when they were visiting Aros Hall, one of two community centres which were in receipt of money from the Royal Foundation. This is the charitable arm and philanthropic arm of Kate and William's work. So they've given some money to two community centres to do them up and make them a real hub for the local community. And there she was helping out with a nail gun.
Terrifying prospect.
And looked rather handy. And then this revelation came out that she's got a chainsaw for Christmas, and she likes to keep bees, and she's very, very handy.
There was a lovely admission from her as well, because part of their sort of refurbishment and money towards Aros Hall is to do with the whole sort of idea of community centres, new parents being able to bring children along to play centres, and they talked about how the fact that their kids love soft play. But she also mentioned that when she was a young mother, for the lack of, particularly with Prince George first time round, when she didn't really have anyone to hang out with, and bearing in mind they were in Anglesey and quite a remote spot, she would go to the local Waitrose cafe with George as a baby just to have interaction with other people. Can you imagine what the other parents pitching up at the Waitrose cafe thought when the then Duchess of Cambridge tipped up with the future king, his little baby?
I think it's so sad, really, isn't it? And I think they wanted to go to, they enjoyed their time in Anglesey in North Wales because they were, it was remote. They could be private, but then there wasn't that kind of sense of community around it either. And the fact that she was just going to And I think any young mum can sympathise with that. You just got to get out of the house.
Yeah.
But I think there's all this. It's driving her work, isn't it?
In terms of the early years and the importance of interaction with babies and children with other children.
Absolutely. And this is all kind of fed into, if it's tough for me with everything I've got, all the privilege I've got, it must be really tough for some other people. So it's that personal experience driving there.
They did seem, a lot of the coverage and a lot of the people who were up there with them, they did seem to be very happy, in a very good place.
They did. They released this amazing image, didn't they, of them having a little cuddle in front of a lake there on a very picturesque part. And they seem very jolly, and it's nice to see. She looked very healthy after the year that she's had. And it was the first time since her cancer diagnosis that she had an overnight stay with work. And obviously feeling well enough that she can do that as this gradual return to public duties continues. I think it's interesting as well. I wrote a very long piece for the magazine recently about William, his role, how it's different from what's gone before, and what sort of a king he will be when the time comes. Now, no one's suggesting that's going to be particularly anytime soon, but of course the palace are always preparing. I mean, I remember years ago, and I'm sure the same for you, being briefed by the then Prince Charles team about what sort of king he would be when the time came. And that transition prep was going on a long time before anyone was suggesting there was any ill health with the late Queen. But we were told he was going to be a convener king. He was going to do things differently. And when I started talking and kind of sort of pushing around about what sort of King William might be, it was quite interesting that people weren't actually squeamish to talk about it. And there is a lot of thought and prep going along behind the scenes, obviously, because the palace always prepares for these things.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting that we are just seeing something quite different from what's gone on before. The proliferation of video messages, for example. I mean, we've seen a lot of those.
We have, more and more.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, though, that almost in a way it feels like Buckingham Palace, Charles's team, have started doing a little bit more of those too, perhaps followed by, kind of closely following how well the Wales's video messages do.
Yes.
Do you think?
I think so. I think everyone's kind of learned, well, in the same way that any generation learns from the youngsters coming up. And
for them, though, I suppose for William, he feels, he always talks about how staying relevant is the hardest, biggest challenge for him into the next reign.
Yeah, how leading this ancient institution.
How do you keep it relevant?
That's right. And I think for him as well, there's this, someone said to me, there's kind of three parts to what he wants. So as normal a life as possible, as private a life as possible, and to have control. And we see that with William quite a lot, don't we? He wants control over his image. And Kate's right there with him on that. They are in lockstep when it comes to controlling their image.
Yeah.
There were elements that take place away from the royal rota and reporters that are more managed. And they put out a video to and I think it's controlling that and saying, we have this private life, we want to protect our children, and I think any member of the public will support that. But there were funny elements that happened on the trip as well. It reminded me of the time that William went on an engagement and the football star Gaza popped up at a pret-a-manger.
That was so random, wasn't it?
And this time, the Gaza moment, if we can call it that, was
Ruby Wax.
Ruby Wax,
who came out with some absolute
on the Isle of Iona
corkers, saying she was on a silent retreat and they'd interrupted it.
And and then she started talking from her silent retreat.
Because once she starts, she rarely stops.
Was telling how handsome the Prince of Wales was.
She said,
she's met him before.
I didn't realise how good looking he was. He looks like his mother, is what she said.
Yes.
It was very funny.
It was very funny. So there's always
a random cropping up at their engagements, isn't there?
There's always a surprise moment in this job, isn't there? at least one a day.
Ruby Wax on a silent retreat in Iona. Who knew?
But they did. I mean, part of it was that they're saying they want to promote these remote destinations as tourist destinations, and it just looks stunning.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
I would be amazed if it doesn't work, if it doesn't get people booking to go there on holiday.
I'm sure.
A beautiful spot. Well, from a future king with a clear sense of duty to a more divisive royal figure, let's say, whose position couldn't be more different.
Yes, well, we've just been talking about the monarchy's future in the hands of Prince William. Well, Prince Andrew's very much the story the palace would much rather leave in the past, but just can't seem to.
It can't. It keeps coming back. And the news agenda this week has been rather sobering. Last week, Virginia Giuffre, the woman whose allegations against Prince Andrew brought global attention to his ties with Jeffrey Epstein, has died by suicide in Australia. Prince Andrew has consistently denied all the allegations against him, but let's remember this was a woman who brought a civil case against him, accusing him of sexual assault. And he settled out of court for an undisclosed fee, widely reported to be around the 10 million, 12 million mark, whether that's dollars or pounds, take your pick. The figure was never disclosed. They hoped that would be an end to the matter, but of course it never was.
It's never quite gone away, has it?
No.
The stain of that whole episode, the stain of Prince Andrew's friendships with Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted paedophile who took his own life in prison, his friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell, the convicted paedophile who is currently in prison, and whatever his relationship was or wasn't with Virginia Giuffre. He, of course, never admitted any liability for anything in that settlement. But of those four people, two of them are now dead. And Andrew, it's the thing that keeps coming back. I remember a couple of years ago, it was actually 3 years ago, ahead of reign change, the Prince of Wales, then Prince Charles, made it very clear every time Andrew kept trying to sort of re-emerge and come back to public life or try that out, he made it very clear by briefing someone who briefed the Times at the time to say, the problem here is that although the king loves his brother very much, the reputational damage to the institution just keeps recurring. And he described it as the spectre of this problem is unsolvable, which means there is demonstrably no way back for Andrew. And this later said this tragic event of Virginia Giuffre taking her own life just completely proves that the king read the runes there. And I suspect that this probably won't be the end of it for Andrew.
Has he gone far enough? People at the palace will say, what more can he possibly do?
Yeah. We saw him at Easter, didn't we?
Yeah, we've talked before about him trying to get Andrew out of Royal Lodge, that he's still living in what appears to be the lap of luxury. Previously at the largesse of his brother, that money has now been withdrawn, but he's still there. It's not a good look. He appeared at Easter with the family. Obviously, this is something that William is very savvy about, and you spoke about it on the podcast last week.
Yeah, Windsor, yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's but it's the problem that's never going to go away. Even though this, like you say, he didn't give any, he didn't make any statement about, or there were no claims or responsibility about the settlement out of court. He nevertheless paid millions of pounds to a woman he claims he can't remember meeting.
And now, she has tragically taken her own life. Really, the reality is that it will be her version of events that stands, because they won't be challenged. And that's difficult for the royal family because it's just always going to be there. Very difficult for the Duke of York, because at the end of the day, someone who he was alleged to have had, a relationship with, who it's always denied, has taken her own life because of the horrendous sexual abuse by, convicted paedophiles. So, again, it just brings back the fact that he has made so many bad decisions in terms of who he's hung out with over the years. That, reappeared last year when we heard that he'd been, had a very close business relationship with this guy Yang Tenbo, who's, that our government thinks is a Chinese spy.
Yeah.
And he claims he's not, but, the government think he is.
But let's be fair, there's no benefit of the doubt that you can even give to Andrew in the Epstein situation. He pleaded guilty to trafficking and sex, procuring sex with 14-year-old girls as young as 14. He pleaded guilty to that. He went to prison for that. After he came out of prison, Andrew was still visiting him.
And staying with him.
As a friend. There is, and that wasn't a secret case. Everybody knew that had happened to Epstein. So it baffles me that, he can still be kind of going around in public with the royal family.
It's like a bit of a roller coaster with him, isn't it? He was uninvited from Christmas at Sandringham because of the Yang Tenbo stuff that was all whipped up. It was, deemed too embarrassing. So it was, he stayed at Royal Lodge with Fergie. Then he bounced back at Easter and was at
I think that was a big mistake.
St George's Chapel, and now this.
Yeah.
So it's really, at the end of the day, it is never a good look for the wider royal family when Andrew is around publicly with them.
Yeah. Well, after that tragic news in Australia, moving on to something rather different. Just when you think we've covered all the royal news for this week, there's more. This time from the US. It's no secret that the Sussex's departure from royal duties left a few questions about their titles. But recently there's been a bit of a stir about Meghan using Her Royal Highness.
Well, Her Royal Highness isn't supposed to use Her Royal Highness, is she?
It was funny, wasn't it? When Megxit happened, they said you can keep Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and they maintain Her and His Royal Highness.
But they're not allowed to use them.
But they're not allowed to use them. And they agreed they wouldn't do anything that would bring the kind of royal brand into disrepute by any commercial.
Uphold the values of Her Majesty.
Exactly.
And there was no, at the time, that the Sandringham summit was sort of struck, a lot of negotiations backwards and forwards about what that deal would look like when they left. But when we got that statement at the end of the Sandringham summit, I remember it coming in on a Saturday night going, there was no fine print around the use of HRH for commercial or non-commercial purposes. It was very simple. They will no longer use their HRHs. Mm-hmm. It was very clear.
Pretty clear, yeah.
So it's been a bit of a surprise to a lot of people. And this emerged when Meghan did a podcast this week, not her own podcast, but a podcast with her friend Jamie Kern-Lima, who owns a cosmetics company. And there was a YouTube video of it and a shot of a basket from a while ago that Meghan had dropped round to her friend, including some raspberry, not jam or spread, but it was like sauce. Or strawberry sauce that she'd made for her.
She had some spread in the fridge there, didn't she? Her friend said. She said it's been there for all year, so I don't know why she'd eaten it.
With a note card that said, with the compliments of HRH, the Duchess of Sussex.
Sure.
Now, it's kicked up a bit of a stink, hasn't it?
Well, it has, because, and quite rightly so, really, because
they're not supposed to be using that.
That's not really the deal.
And then the next day, when all the stink had been kicked up, there were sources close to Meghan briefing various media outlets that actually, I found this fascinating. She uses the HRH to try and in order to feel relevant, and uses it for her. And then there was
sometimes I think when you're in a hole, best just to stop digging.
There was an attempt to try and say she's allowed to use it for personal use, but that wasn't the deal, was it?
I think there would have been better just to let that story slide, and perhaps thought, that's one for the future. We'll just take that off the letterhead, because that isn't that isn't how they were supposed to do it. And I do think these things will kind of change. They'll decide what they want to do, and that's the trouble with it. That if they're not pulled up for it, and there's no appetite from the king to start sending them messages or anything like that, because it will just add fuel to the fire. But I think they'll just do what they want to do over time. And it was interesting this week because there was a tiny little snippet, wasn't there, on one of the podcasts of Lilibet talking, and
video of her.
Yeah.
Cooking with Meghan, and Meghan said,
and it was very sweet. I have to say,
what do you think, Lilibet? And she said, it's beautiful.
I think it's beautiful
in her very strong American accent, as they're little American kids, and there was a lot of speculation that perhaps that might have been difficult for the king to see, because of course he's not seen his grandchildren in America for nearly 3 years.
Yeah. I fancy seeing it on something dropping on an American podcast, but
we are seeing more and more of the children, aren't we? The backs of their heads, and
look, maybe we'll be having this conversation in 20 years' time when Lilibet or Archie have given their first interview, and it'll be an American, born in her case, born and bred princess talking about her experience of being a royal, not far from the top of the tree in terms of the order of accession.